Hello, everyone. My name is Naomi. I'm the secretary of the Vietnamese Student Association, and we also have our president, Thomas.
Hi, I'm Tom. I'm the president of VSA, and I wanted to thank everyone for making the time in your week to come out to our panel. We've worked hard together to bring you a safe processing space and to address the hate crimes that have been happening to the Asian community. Also, I wanted to give credit to Cabo, my bad, for putting in a lot of effort through the planning process. He's currently driving right now, so um, I'll be handling that. That being said, I ask everyone to be respectful and ask appropriate questions during this event. And I'd like to pass the baton to Dr. August, who will be presenting to us about the history in regards of Asian American attacks and other several topics.
Great, thank you so much, Thomas. So when former President Donald Trump repeatedly and pointedly referred to COVID-19 as the China virus, he was drawing upon a deep reservoir of anti-Asian and anti-Asian American imagery and ideology that has been developed in the US over the past 150 years. That is, it was not necessary to explicitly call for anti-Asian hate. Rather, he was able to activate a long lineage of rhetoric that provided the context for his remarks. The recent upsurge in violence directed towards Asian and Asian Americans that reached a boiling point in the murder of 8 people at a massage parlor in Atlanta is an outcome of this reservoir of images, politics, and rhetoric. And as Asian Americanist Sylvia Chong reminds us, racial violence has never been simply a personal affair. It always reflects the deep-seated anxieties and antagonisms that are promoted at the most elite levels, even if the killings are oftentimes committed by equally marginalized people, often working class, or sometimes even other people of color. See, Race in America is a comparative project where definitions of whiteness, blackness, and Asianness are constantly shifting through media images, court cases, and political rhetoric. But even though the production of race is not centralized, it is clear that it is structured in dominance. Racial violence has been a reoccurring reality for Asians and Asian Americans in the US. And to explain, I will borrow from the words of Sylvia Chong, who is following the work here of Asian American studies historians like Erica Lee and Ron Takaki. And I quote, in the 1871 Los Angeles massacre, white and Mexican Americans killed 19 immigrants. And at the massacre of Rock Springs, Wyoming in 1885, white miners killed at least 28 and possibly up to 50 Chinese. In both massacres, not a single perpetrator was brought to justice. In Los Angeles, 8 men received manslaughter convictions, but all were overturned. And in Rock Spring, those arrested were released when the white community refused to testify against them. These massacres, along with countless individual acts of violence, were produced by the same hysteria that sparked the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which essentially blamed Chinese workers rather than white industrialists for the economic suffering of white laborers. The Chinese were not the only targets of such violence. At first, Japanese and later Filipino and South Asian migrants were brought in to replace Chinese coolie labor. They also faced similar acts of mass racial violence and harassment. There are too many to describe today, but we might note the Bellingham, Washington state riots of 1907, which drove away 125 South Asian workers, and the Watsonville, California riots of 1930, which ran hundreds of Filipino farm workers out of town. And of course, as we all know, the Japanese incarceration of 1942 to 1945, which imprisoned over 120,000 Japanese Americans, many of them US citizens, in about a dozen concentration camps spread across the interior West and West Coast. Fast forward to 1982, when Vincent Chin, a 27-year-old Chinese American, was bludgeoned to death by 2 white auto workers in Detroit, Michigan. In many ways, Chin's murder was nothing special. Like the Atlanta shootings, the killers did not scream racial epithets during the killings, nor did they leave behind racial manifestos or profess membership in a known extremist organization. But like the numerous incidents from 40, 80, 100 years ago, this was again set against the backdrop of economic and social hostility against Asians. This time, the impact of the rise of Japanese automakers on the auto industry in Detroit. And like the cases in Rock Springs, Vincent Chin's killers were barely punished. Although they pleaded guilty to manslaughter, neither received any jail time and only had to pay a $3,000 fine. This sparked national outrage, leading many activists to push for Asian Americans to be included as a protected class under hate crime and civil rights policies. But such criminal justice policies do not even begin to address the sources of antagonism and exclusion that made Vincent Chin a victim in the first place. In fact, it was a white liberal judge, Charles Kaufman, who deemed Chin's life to be worth only $3,000. And just as in 2016, when Judge Aaron Persky sentenced rapist Brock Turner, whose victim was also an Asian American, Chanel Miller, to only 6 months in jail, to be released after serving only half of his sentence. I could go on, but as a professor in the humanities, I want to end by mentioning the interplay between these acts, politics, and aesthetics. And that is the ways that Asians and Asian Americans have been represented and how these representations have circulated in the US. Again, I don't have time to go into details, but stereotypes about how Asian and Asian Americans eat, dress, feel, and behave congeal and are disseminated through characters like Fu Manchu, Charlie Chan, the sacrificial prostitute, the faceless collective enemy, the yellow peril, the unfeeling math nerd, boat people, Miss Saigon, and so on and so forth. This is not to suggest that Asian Americans are helpless victims and are not effective and active producers of images, as is evidenced with the recent successes of the shows Fresh Off the Boat, the films, Crazy Rich Asians, To All the Boys I've Loved Before, Ali Wong specials, You'll Always Be My Maybe, and The Farewell. However, these inroads, while they should be celebrated and encouraged, should be understood against the massive backdrop of images, history, and rhetoric that former President Trump and his supporters drew upon. There is much work to be done, and by drawing upon a long history of Asian and Asian American activism, I encourage us all to use this event to share ideas and histories. I'll be teaching a class in the spring of 2022, EGL 369, Immigration Aesthetics in Asian American Literature. And I would love to have the opportunity to have some of you in the class so that we could talk about this further. Or, I have an open door if any of you would like to reach out to me otherwise. I also would like to direct you towards the other Asian Americanists on campus, Shirley Lim in history, Jeffrey Santa Ana with me in English, Nerissa Balse in Asian and Asian American Studies, and E.K. Tan, the current chair of Asian and Asian American Studies, and again, a colleague of mine in English. So please seek us out, take our classes, we're here to help. And finally, I'd like to recommend 2 books by Erica Lee, if you want, thorough yet accessible primers on the histories of Asian Americans and xenophobic racism. One being The Making of Asian America, a history, and number 2, America for Americans, a history of xenophobia in the US. Thank you all for inviting me. It's truly an honor. And, thank you.
Thank you for speaking, and I'd like to introduce our moderator of tonight, Kiara.
Hello, everyone. I'm Kiara Arias. I'm the Director of Diversity and Inclusion Affairs for USG. And as Thomas mentioned, I'm going to be moderating today's panel. So thank you for all joining us here today. We're going to begin the panel with opening remarks from the panelists, and I'm going to let them have a chance to introduce themselves. So with that being said, first panelist, Judy.
Hi, everyone. My name is Judy Lay, and I am a Black and Asian graduating senior majoring in Asian and Asian American Studies. I was the 2019 to 2020 president of the SBU VSA, as well as the 2019 to 2020 vice chairperson of District 3 Find Inc., and the 2018 to 2019 external public relations officer of Stony Brook VSA. I'm really grateful to these organizations for giving me the opportunity to be a student leader, my professors who have given me the education, knowledge, and words to be able to speak here today, my parents who have given me the identity and culture as a mixed Asian American, and to everyone here to support the aAPI community this evening. I'm here as a mixed Asian American woman and as an Asian and Asian American studies scholar and as a young activist to show you all just a sliver of how diverse and beautiful our aAPI community is. I hope that everyone that is here and to those watching this later on will feel solidarity despite our diversity. This event is for our South Asians, for our Pacific Islanders, for our queer Asians, and what I'm trying to get at is that it is for all Asians. I want to stress that because we are here as one whole community of aAPI folk and as allies to find some answers, seek some refuge, and understand our privileges and roles in our social spaces. Although my personal experience cannot speak for all, I hope that the things I share today will bring some light and understanding to the violence and racism that is deeply rooted in our American history and what we could do as a community at Stony Brook and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Judy. Next, we have Robin.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me here today. My name is Robin Shum. I am born and raised in New York and currently living in Long Island, but my parents grew up in Chinatown and Brooklyn respectively, but more on that later. I graduated from Stony Brook last year, May 2020, with a degree in TSM and linguistics. And some of you might know me as formerly being part of CTC. And I was involved in other Asian orgs on campus like PUSO and VSA, where I was VSA's Miss Asia in 2018. That opportunity opened my eyes to how I could use a platform to spread awareness about things I cared about, such as Asian American history and social activism, which continues to be an interest of mine today. More specifically, I've been feeling very hurt and powerless by the recent attacks on the Asian community and the hate crimes. And for the last couple of months, I've been processing it, which is why I'm really thankful to have an event like this today. And those feelings have helped fuel me into trying to make a difference. And last month, I was able to channel that hurt and anger into empowering and calling to action my community for fundraisers, specifically for Asian orgs to advance equality. And it showed to me that even regular people like me who don't necessarily have a platform and aren't part of cultural orgs on campus anymore can still make a difference. And so, though I don't have a formal degree in Asian American studies, the Asian American experience is something I've lived as an Asian American, or more specifically, Cantonese Chinese. So I'm really honored to speak here today and also be able to learn from the other panelists. Thank you.
Thank you, Robin. And lastly, we have Dr. Min.
Hello, everyone. Oh, unmute myself. All right. Hello, everyone. Sorry about that technical situation. My name is Ming Nguyen, and I just want to thank everyone involved at Stony Brook for your kind invitation to participate in this very important panel. And I would like to thank, in particular, Professor. I worked with Naomi a lot, so I want to thank Naomi for that. And I also thank a faculty member at Stony Brook, Professor Gary Marr, for introducing me to VSA and then through VSA to all the student organizations who organize this event. So let me just say, I am the Assistant Dean of the Honors College at Professor of Philosophy and also faculty affiliate of the Center for Critical Race and Ethnic Studies at Florida Gulf Coast University. Allow me to say a little bit about myself, because I think that will shed light on where I'm coming from and why perhaps I respond to your questions in a certain way. I was born and raised in Vietnam, and in 1982, my parents arranged for me, then an unskilled, unaccompanied minor, to flee communist Vietnam on a little boat. So I came to this country a few months before I turned 17, after having spent 17 months in 2 refugee camps in Indonesia. So I am a refugee. My wife is a refugee. My siblings, my brothers and sisters are refugees, and my wife's parents and siblings are refugees. So thanks to this country, we enjoy the freedom that we have. And thanks to this country, we enjoy all the wonderful opportunities that we do have, and we try to make the best of those opportunities. So it comes as no surprise that we love this country and very grateful to this country. I was asked, however, by the organizers of this panel to share, because given the topic that we are discussing today, to share some personal experiences of racism and xenophobia. And from casual everyday racism to more explicit and obvious violence. So I'm going to take this opportunity to share those. But I want you to understand those experiences in the overall context of where I'm coming from, or where my family is coming from. So let me share a few examples. My wife, who went to high school in Plainfield, New Jersey, she, as I mentioned, she came here as a teenager and as a refugee like myself. And she was bullied and beaten repeatedly all the while. School administrators looked away. And one of the most horrendous acts she faced was when she bought her first car with the money she had been saving for years. And only a few days later, it had been intentionally set on fire and destroyed. And this was in Plainfield, South Plainfield, New Jersey. The hate that we face, though less visible and violent, did not go away when our daughters arrived. We have 2 daughters, Cynthia and Vivian. So when our youngest daughter's, Vivian's first taste of racism was when she was 6. This happens when we lived in Kentucky, Richmond, Kentucky. So when students would not allow Vivian to enter the bathroom and classroom, and told her to go back to where she came from. Vivian was born in Summit, New Jersey, and the country she was supposed to go back to was Iraq, because this happened at the height of the Iraq War. That very same year, my older daughter, Cynthia, was called slurs such as jing and gook by other teenagers right in front of their teachers. In both cases, no students were punished for the action. As they got older, both of my daughters faced more verbal racism and discrimination, not just from their peers, but also from their teachers as well. Last example. So even after living in our community for more than a decade, we experienced an unsuccessful break-in at around 1:30. So And the assailants beat on our door and yelled, "Fucking Asians," while doing so. So we reported these events to the police, but it was not classified as a hate crime. When we first began, so let's move to the present. When we first began learning of the increased violence and racism and discrimination against Asian Americans, beginning around February and March of last year, there was an outpour of national and public statements condemning these acts of hatred. Now, as a member of a national professional organization, I'm not going to name names because that's not the main issue here. There was, as a member of a national professional organization, and especially urged by COVID-related racism that my daughter faced on her college campus, I asked that organization to release a statement condemning Asian hatred. They refused to do so, and it took times. They did not do it until the event in Atlanta not so long ago. Okay? Now, I have been thinking a lot about this experience, and I'm telling you this story for several reasons. Number one, we have to fight to be heard, to be seen in the spaces that we occupy. It's not a guarantee, and being aracial, non-racial is not a choice. So never leave your Asianness at the door. Okay? Number two, you shouldn't have to force people to acknowledge your existence, but sometimes you do. Sometimes it is on you, on us, to help educate and raise consciousness about issues that we care about. If we do not advocate for ourselves, do not expect others to advocate for us. Number three, in whatever career you have that you pursue, you have a responsibility to ourselves and to all the Asians and people of color and marginalized people in general to go out in justice, to say that something is wrong, and to know that a statement is not enough, is only a start. Number four, lastly, there are many ways to combat racism. Big or small, do something in this area. Okay? We have captured something very meaningful with today's hashtag Stop Asian Hate movement, but it's not enough. Hashtag Stop Asian Hate implies that once we stop the type of hatred we are facing right now, we can go back to normal, whatever that means. But this normal we wish to return to is just as wrong. It has always been built upon institutionalized anti-Asian racism, xenophobia, discrimination, and exclusion. So how do we turn Stop Asian Hate into a larger movement? And I will conclude my introductory remarks. So number one, it means first fighting anti-Asian hate on the streets, but then going beyond this. This is a sustainable movement that we should and can take advantage of. Number two, gaining the momentum we need requires the following: uplifting the most vulnerable and the most invisible members of our community, fighting ignorance and misinformation, unlearning, and we all have a responsibility to do this, even as people of color and members of the marginalized community. Unlearn the hate within ourselves, unlearn internalized racism. And last but not least, prioritizing joy and rest. Be kind to others, but be kind to ourselves as well. We cannot always be thinking about these heavy issues such as racism and discrimination. Part of healing from racism and discrimination is taking time to enjoy ourselves and to celebrate our cultures, to seek comfort and solidarity from our communities is a powerful act of defense that affirms how much of a joy it is to be Asian, and it truly is a joy. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think I can speak for everyone when I say that, you know, it's not fair that you and your family had to go through that, especially from a young age. But thank you for sharing your experiences, as I'm sure that a lot of people can relate to it and learn from it. So with that being said, I'm going to start off with the first question for the panelists. So what makes you proud to be an Asian American?
Thank you. Thank you, Kiara, for your kind words. And now, I love talking about being proud. Being proud, right? There's so many things that I'm proud of being an Asian American and being proud about Asian Americans. There's no doubt in my mind that Asian Americans have made incredible fundamental contributions and continue to do so to the greatness, to the glory of this country. There's no denying that. I mean, if you take any field from music to technology to science, the arts, any field, film, if you watched the Academy Awards ceremony last week, then you know what I'm talking about. There's no doubt that we have made incredible contributions to the greatness of this country. And sometimes, even in spite of all the discrimination and that we have to face, and sometimes they do not earn sufficient credit for their achievements. So that is something that I'm very proud about Asian Americans. Now, I'm also proud of the fact that, especially in recent years, the attempt on the part of various Asian Asian Americans and various groups advocating for them to help build coalitions in order to fight injustice. I think that that is a very significant advance, and that is something wonderful that I cherish and I celebrate. And also, by extension, I'm very proud of our heritage. If you think of our Asian heritage, Asia is the home of some of the most important world cultures and religions and philosophies. So you talk, for example, Buddhism, Hinduism, Confucianism, and Taoism, Shinto, you name it. These religious, philosophical, and cultural and artistic traditions are very important parts of the world's heritage. And another example is that because I happen to love to eat, and talking about Asian food, right? And so it's very rich, very diverse, very tasty. Chinese, Indian, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Thai, Malaysian, Laotian. And you are very lucky. I'm living in Florida, and I used to live for 12 years in New York, so I get to taste all these wonderful things, okay? but you have that advantage. Anything that you would like to try, in terms of ethnic Asian food, you have that opportunity. So just to give a brief answer as to why those are some of the things that I'm very proud of being an Asian American and being an Asian. Yeah, thank you.
No, thank you. I'm happy that you have a lot of things to be proud about. That's a beautiful thing. But I saw Judy had her hand up, so I'm gonna go to Judy.
Thank you, Dr. Wing. It's hard to follow up everything that was just spoken about for sure, but I would say for me, definitely the history of Asians and of our aAPI community stands out to me the most. As an Asian and Asian American studies major, it's something that I've been surrounding myself a lot with for the past 4 years in college. And it's something that I really did not know about before college. Like I went to a majority white high school and just like schools in general. And a lot of our history was left out of the dialogue. And it's something that I didn't learn about until now with this focus. And our history is like so deep and rich, but it's not just the history that roots back to the country. It's also, we have to remember that we play a role as Asian Americans in American history as well. And I think appreciating that makes me very proud to be an Asian American, that dual identity. Also appreciating my parents and my grandparents, their stories, something that I keep being told when I go to like these like organization events is like, oh, like listen to your parents' stories and things like that. And I can't, at first I was like, okay, like you guys sound like a broken record, like saying this over and over again. But like once I sat down and I really listened to my parents' story, I realized I was like, oh, there's a reason why they keep telling us to do this. Like, you know, our parents aren't like, you know, they're like, you'd be lucky if they're authors or like getting their stories written down in these textbooks, but majority of us, they're not, and they're being left out of the narrative. So it's kind of up to us to know the stories of our parents and kind of be proud, you know, they went from this other country to here, or maybe you are a part of that traveling narrative, or maybe it was your grandparents, and that itself is something to be super proud about. So like acknowledge it, write it down, you know, share it. Like people want to know about your narrative. I think another part that would make me very proud to be an Asian American would be the activism that Dr. Wing talked about. I know for our generation, we're seeing a lot of social media activism, a lot of people trying to talk about, you know, stop Asian hate, a lot of people trying to inform their peers about different things like the model minority myth or just like other systemic issues. And I think being a part of this kind of new activism is also where I feel very proud to be an Asian American, because something to talk about is like, this isn't the first time that Asians have like come together and have spoken out. Like we have a long history of actually doing that as well in America, but we don't really learn about it. And so kind of being a part of this history, like we're gonna make history books, y'all. Like in the future, our kids are gonna learn about like, oh my God, like on Instagram, like this person posted this, like that's gonna be kind of wild to think about, but it's something we will learn about. And I think that's something to be proud about. Like y'all are a part of this history. Like you can tell your kids like, hey, like I did this and this, you know, like that's something really special. So be proud of it. Like it's not just me being proud, but I hope you all can feel proud as well of being a part of this, you know, like just this event in general. So yeah, that's my take on it.
Thank you for that. I love that you brought up, you know, your experience with your parents and how they're always reminding you to you know your story, basically, because a lot of our history, at least American history, is whitewashed. You know, it doesn't really focus a lot around the Asian experience or the Black experience or the Hispanic experience. We don't really get to know about all of that unless we have our family there to tell us how it really happened from their perspective and their experience. So I think that's why it is important to remember these things. You can, you know, sort of have more accurate version of history. Moving on, growing up, have any of you had any experiences where you may not have felt as proud to be an Asian American? And if you have felt that way, did this trend continue into your current life today? Robin, can you hear her? I can't hear you.
Sorry,
Well,
can you hear me now?
oh, yes, I hear you now.
Okay, I had some computer issues, so
No, you're
sorry
good.
about that. But I can take this question. I think the keyword for me here was being American. Like growing up, I always identified as Chinese, and American was implicit. And so I just go around telling people I was Chinese. And I became acutely aware that I was Chinese American when I was at a play date in middle school at a friend's house, and she was eating with a bowl and chopsticks, and she's Chinese American too. And I told her, like, wow, this is really cool. When I'm at home, I don't usually eat with chopsticks. And she was shocked. She was like, wait, so you eat on forks and plates? And I was like, yeah, like that's normal. Like I'll use chopsticks sometimes, but mostly it's plates and forks. And then she followed it up with a comment like, oh, you're so white. And that was really hurtful, I think, because I had always identified as Chinese. And that was the first time I realized that maybe some of the cultural tenets, I guess, if using chopsticks is one of those, of being Chinese was being called into question. And so it was weird to also feel ashamed that in bridging these two cultures, I was seen as less Chinese by this friend. But as time went on, I realized like this isn't like, it's not going to make or break my culture, whether I eat a certain way or not. And since then, I've definitely faced like insensitive comments just walking in a grocery store, people asking me where I'm from. I don't think that anyone really has a necessarily right to do that, because it just is a little uncomfortable to be targeted or asked a certain question just because I have dark hair and like my skin is this type of color. But I think that also over time, like in my workplace and professional life, like I feel very lucky to be part of a company that really does respect people's backgrounds. And when the rise in Asian hate crimes happened, my company held a town hall where they explained like this was a safe space for Asian employees and like a place for non-Asian employees to learn about what's been happening. So I think it's come full circle in feeling a little bit ashamed for being both Chinese and American, and then feeling empowered that other people in my community saw what I was going through and saw what people in my community are going through.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with, sometimes not feeling quite enough to be of a certain community, and then also not being quite enough to be of this community, but still being able to find pride wherever you fit in. Oh, Judy.
Hi, so I definitely relate a lot to what you said, Robin. Just like kind of not really fitting into our own Asian community, and especially for me, I'm mixed Black and Asian, and so growing up, it's been kind of difficult navigating that identity for me. I remember one time, one thing that made me feel ashamed for being Asian American, but from like a non-Asian perspective, was this. I used to be very like open as a little kid, and one time I told this boy that I liked, and I was like, "Hi, like I really like you," kind of thing. I like shot my shot as an elementary school kid, and he told me like, "I don't like dark people," and like like that can include anybody. And I was in elementary school, and I was just kind of like, I didn't even know that there was like that much of a difference between me and him. But that was the first time that I really was like, I look different than you, and that makes a really big deal for some people. And so that was definitely played like a role into me kind of leaving my Asian identity. And this also was seen actually by the Asian community. I'm Vietnamese, and One time when I was younger, my mom wanted me to go to this Vietnamese church to kind of like learn Vietnamese and like hang out with Viet kids. But I stopped going because the other kids were like, oh, you're too Black. Like, you don't know enough Vietnamese and you're just not Viet enough. Like, Black people shouldn't be here. And this does not speak for everybody. I just want to say this is just my own experience. But unfortunately, I was only a little kid. And so, you know, being told this at school and then going to like a Viet community and being told this, I felt ashamed for being Asian. I felt like I wasn't accepted anywhere where I thought I could be accepted. And so I started to like ignore my Asian identity. I moved away from my Viet culture a lot. And this still played a role for me because especially out of my siblings, I'm definitely the most Asian passing out of my siblings. Since we're all mixed, we have like a range of different colors, different looks. I have one brother who's very Black passing, like looks like straight from like our African genes. And then I kind of have the other end where I'm like very Asian passing. And so leaving my Asian identity and like feeling ashamed for it was still hard for me to completely do, because sometimes people would be like, oh, like you're Asian, right? But I'm not really sure. Like they would still judge me by the way I looked. And I think that definitely played a toll into how proud I was to be an Asian American. But I'm fortunate now to like have the education and knowledge to know that like that's just a certain time of my life, and I now have the words to be able to like speak against that and like understand that them putting me in a certain bubble doesn't define who I am.
Yeah, I completely understand and feel you on that. Sometimes you learn a lot from those sorts of experiences at school, and it kind of makes you more appreciative of the things that you do have and of your culture. But Dr. Min, I see that your hand is raised, so I'm going to go to you.
Thank you, Kiara, and thank you, Judy and Robin, for sharing your experiences. I mean, your experiences are unique, and so I'm also want to share my experience, and probably is a little bit different from yours. I could be wrong, but please feel free to correct me. Both of you were born in the US, is that right? Okay, so this is from a perspective of someone who was born in the US. Now, to answer Kiara's question, the answer is yes. But I want to clarify it. Okay. First of all, I don't know if shame is the right word. I don't know, deep disappointment or something within that family of negative emotions. The answer is yes. But I'm going to use that language anyway, just to make things simple. Being ashamed of being Asian American, the answer is yes, but in this very specific sense. So let me just give you a long-winded response, and that is that, as I mentioned in my introductory remarks, I was born and raised in Vietnam, and I didn't come to the US until I was already a teenager. I had no sense of being an Asian or being Vietnamese while living in Vietnam, because there was no reason to. I mean, Vietnamese being the Vietnamese culture is the dominant culture there. But when I came here, a combination of factors. I wasn't born here. My English was poor, especially my spoken English. So I was hypersensitive of my being a Vietnamese. And of course, being an Asian American. So that, and because of my love and affections for my fellow Vietnamese refugees and immigrants, I identify with them a lot. So when there were some wonderful stories about some of them in the news, I felt the pride. And conversely, I felt a deep sense of disappointment when I read in the newspapers. I was living in New York and New Jersey, and some areas are quite rough. especially Canal Street in Chinatown. And sometimes you hear stories about gang violence, Vietnamese American gang violence. And whenever I read those stories, I just felt a deep sense of shame, disappointment, that sorts of emotion. Even though none of them were members of my family, but I felt that they let our community down. Okay, and this sense of disappointment is a little bit personal in this sense. And the reason for that is that, you know, that not everyone, I mean, as I say, I'm so grateful to this country for welcoming me and all the Vietnamese refugees to this country. But not everyone is like that. Whenever there is an instance of, you know, Vietnamese gang violence or some criminal act perpetrated by Vietnamese, you know, some anti-refugee and anti-immigrants may use this as an example for, you know, radically reducing the number of refugees allowed to this country. And as I say, I felt whenever there is a debate in Congress about that, and it looks like during that time in the 80s and 90s, we have that debate every single year. I felt very personal about this because my older sister and my younger brother lived for more than 3 years in a refugee camp in Malaysia. And then because of the fact that Congress, with the president's support, decided to shut down all the refugee camps in Southeast Asia. So they were forcibly deported to Vietnam. And you know how challenging that was for them. So when people who got the opportunity to come here, you know, with all the opportunity to pursue an education, to do all the wonderful things, and they turn to crimes, that was a big disappointment to me. Now, and similarly, when, you know, other Asians committed crimes and things like that, I also felt some level, some feeling of disappointment, but not to this extent. Now, as the second question that you asked me is that, does this continue? And the answer is yes, but now my feeling is much more nuanced, in the sense that maybe I gain more knowledge. I gain more knowledge that it was very tough for us when we arrived here as refugees. And after 6 months of living on public supports, essentially you are on your own, okay? And many of the boys, and usually the boys are the one who created trouble. I mean, it's just a fact. Many of the boys were like me in the refugee camp. We were unaccompanied minors. We have no parents, no uncles, no aunts, no adult caretakers. So because of loneliness, because of desperation, they turn to, you know, they hang out with the boys that they play soccer with. And it's happened because I know personally that some of them were in the gang. Why? Because these are their families. These people are their families. But knowing that there was, I mean, I'm not saying this to excuse anyone from, you know, bad actions, but I mean, there is this context that there was not sufficient, in my view, there was not sufficient supports, okay, social service. And it was for this reason that many of them turned to, you know, to gangsters, and then and hang around with them, and in time become one of them. Okay, it is a sad thing. Another point that I want to make is that there is the consideration of the model minority myth, the good immigrants paradigm. There is, whether we like it or not, we carry this burden, and that we have to live up to something, okay? Because otherwise we would fail people within our community and outside of our community. So given all these things that I learned as I grew older, I felt more compassion towards those boys who became criminals or who perform criminal acts. As I say, the situation is more complicated than I thought originally, but that is how I felt, and so my response to your two-part question.
Thank you for that. You brought up something interesting that I want to touch on really quickly, which was the immigrant experience. So initially you didn't even notice that there was a difference when you were in Vietnam, because everyone looks like you. That is a dominant race. But it wasn't until you came to America where you realized you were actually different than other people, that there are people who may not look like you, may speak differently, may eat different foods. And the reason I want to bring that up is because my dad is Dominican, and he said a similar thing from when he first came from the DR, which was, you know, he didn't even understand the concept of race until he came here. That wasn't like a thing that was even spoken about until you come to America, where race has such an important, plays such an important factor of like all aspects of our society. So I think that was an important thing that you brought up. But moving on to the other questions that we have, and in the interest of time, I want to make sure we can get everything in. So how have you been impacted by the pandemic and the negative stereotypes that arose during this time? Timothy August mentioned earlier about Trump's rhetoric during the beginning of the pandemic, where we had people saying things like the Kung flu and things like that. So how did those stereotypes make racism for you worse? And yeah, could you just speak on your experience with that?
Yes, so for me personally, I've seen a lot of this happen to my father, actually. He is the one in my family where I get my Asian heritage from. And my father was actually assaulted at Penn Station. And when it happened, like, I wasn't there because he was on his way to work. So this was like 4 a.m. He's a construction worker in New York City. And when it happened, nobody turned around to help him. And when he went to the police, because there's police station like everywhere in Penn Station. And when he went to them, they told him that they did not see it happen, although like it happened right in front of them. And they even saw like the guy run away, but they were just kind of like, oh, like we didn't see it. And so it's something to really like think about. And when my dad told me later, I recommended to him to go report it afterwards. I know we all have kind of mixed feelings about our placement, especially with the system and policing and everything, but at least for my father, I wanted him to kind of have a little bit of peace that he's telling somebody and that hopefully something is done. But that's not like the first time I've seen my dad being like met with this kind of racism. He's told me stories of like when he was a young construction worker and like the racism he's faced with on the job with a lot of like white people on the construction site. But another time I saw, we were like at like a 7-Eleven or some sort of gas station. And this was on Veterans Day. This was a few years back. I might have been in like high school. And a man came out of his car and saw my dad and just started screaming at him. And he was just like, you know, today is my day, it's Veterans Day, you go back to your country, like you like don't deserve to be here and things like that. And obviously this does not speak to all veterans, like, you know, we love the people that have fought for our country, but it was just so unfortunate that my dad had to be met with that kind of, those kind of words. And that man didn't even speak to my dad. Like he just saw my dad and he was just like, ah. And like when he saw like my mom and like us and us being a mixed family, he started like cursing at us as well. Like, why would you hang out with these like Asian, like this Asian man? And like, you guys are a product of this. And it's just like, you know, since that happened a few years ago, it makes me think back to the things that are happening now. Like, it's not new, the Asian hate crimes. It's happened for such a long time, but I think definitely what was spoken about earlier by Dr. August, like it's just kind of a rise of like that feeling, like people are kind of coming out of like their shells and being more comfortable to say these hateful things because they're just not as ashamed. And I think it's just really important for us to not get stuck with the things that happen to us. Like, although these things happen to my dad, he still works at where he works. You know, he's still proud to be Asian, and it's something that he's would never like trade for. And I know that he's also very proud to be an American citizen now. And that's something he really places on me as well. And so, yeah.
Like people mentioned in the chat, I'm sorry that that happened to your father and you. I've noticed that a lot of the attacks against Asians have been extremely like unprovoked attacks. It's literally just people standing there and getting attacked out of nowhere simply for being Asian. And it's scary, but I'm glad you brought up that this isn't something new. This is something that has been happening. It's just being brought to our attention. And I'm glad that there's a movement to start addressing it. But moving on to the next question, how can we work towards diminishing stereotypes about the Asian community?
I think it takes a bit of a hard truth. Like people are going to think what they think about you no matter what, even if they don't know your background and how hard you've worked to be in this country or stay in this country or how hard your family has worked. And I don't know if this is a generous or saddening interpretation, but I think that a lot of the stereotypes that people put on Asians come out of ignorance. And so I think the first step would be education and spreading awareness about that. I definitely don't think that we should just change our behavior to not be seen as like a model minority or by being cheap or by being good at math just because somebody thinks that that's the case for people who look like us. Because if you want to save money, like go for it. If you're good at math, embrace it. Like it's not productive to play down your intelligence just because of what someone might think about you. And I think the next step is to also call out stereotypes when you see them in whatever capacity you can. Like I know it's hard sometimes, like if you're walking down a street unprovoked and someone flat out attacks you, I think that's something that's really, like I can't imagine what I would do if that happened to me. But in a less physical sense, like for example, the top that I'm wearing right now was actually like posted on a website of a friend of mine who grew up in Florida, like went to school in South Carolina. So she's non-Asian and she has a business where she thrifts clothes. And she posted this top on her website and the caption just alluded to her not knowing what the top was or what it implicated. And the shirt that I'm wearing is in Cantonese, it's called a 𝙏𝙚𝙚, or in Mandarin, it's a 𝙑𝙑𝙀, which is a traditional Chinese outfit. And so it brings with it the weight of all the cultural implications of carrying Chinese culture and the fashion. And she posted herself wearing it with some of the buttons undone and wearing a really tight skirt with a slit down it. And I had this point where I felt like I was at sort of the edge of like a pivot. I was thinking to myself, okay, I could just let her sell it and not say anything, or maybe I should say something. And so I had to really introspect and think like, my parents didn't immigrate here. My great grandparents didn't come here in 1920 just for me to feel uncomfortable being who I am and work so hard for me to have the experiences I did just so that I could be put down by someone who doesn't even know anything about my culture. And so I channeled that strength in knowing that my family has worked hard to be here to say to her, like, I think the top that you're selling perpetuates dangerous stereotypes of over-sexualization and exoticism, and would you mind taking it down? And I think the bringing this up, like, there's definitely like a way to bring it up so it's not aggressive, because I guess she really didn't know, because she was like, oh, I'm so sorry about that. Like, I didn't mean to be ignorant, and I'll take it down immediately. Like, I'll teach myself and make sure to never do this again. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. And so that was a positive outcome of a really difficult conversation. And at the end of the day, she ended up sending me the top saying thank you for educating her. So I think in less physical, nonviolent situations, you can address the stereotypes by flat out having a conversation. But also it depends on the capacity at which you're able to. So I think it's definitely hard, but if you can speak up where you feel comfortable, definitely do, because if people continue to put these stereotypes on you and you don't say anything, that they're going to think it's okay.
Yeah, I completely agree. Getting comfortable with the awkwardness of, you know, letting people know that this isn't okay. This doesn't make me feel comfortable. I would appreciate it if you didn't do this. And sometimes it's going to be difficult to tell your friends, maybe you shouldn't say that. Maybe you shouldn't wear that. But at the end of the day, if they're really your friends, they're going to take what you have to say and try to change their actions or their behaviors accordingly, if they really respect you and your culture. So in saying that, what are some other steps that we can take to advocate in and outside of the Asian community to prevent and solve these issues? Dr. Min, if
Okay, thank you, Kiara. Was the question, how can we tie older generations of Asian Americans to our current activism? Is that right?
that was the second part of the question, yes.
Okay, so I thank you, Kiara, for clarifying this. I would say that, well, I'm 53, so I guess I belong to the older generations now. But so number one, I just have some thoughts on this matter. And regarding tying older generations of Asian Americans to our current activism. I think that we should not discount or take for granted the foundations that the older generations of Asian Americans have set up for today's youth. We can acknowledge the contributions from both generations. A lot of the information and the networks that we have are based around the previous structures. Okay, just to give you an example, the Museum of Chinese in America, located in Chinatown, New York City, that was created by Chinese Americans who picked up old suitcases and around Chinatown, and they found value in their grandparents and other elders' histories, and they began to archive the things in them. And nearly all, if not all, of the universities in the US have nearly all, if not all, of the universities in the US that have Asian American studies is a product of Asian activism for their unique histories. And just to take this opportunity to brag that when I was at Kentucky, Eastern Kentucky University, I worked, and this is very important for the young people, collaboration is key, okay? I worked with more than 30 faculty and staff and administrators to establish the Asian Studies program. So one person alone, you won't be able to pull it off. And I had the honor to serve as the first director of Asian Studies at EKU. And also more personally, as a student at Columbia in the 90s, in the late 80s and early 90s, I participated in protests against unjust deportation of Vietnamese refugees in Southeast Asia. And I was also a co-founding president of the VSA at Columbia University. Ancestry is very important in virtually in all Asian cultures that I'm aware of. And this is something that we can celebrate in our activism. So one way we can tie our activism is by continuing these legacies, partly in our education, but also in these more tangible structures that they have, the previous generations have created. Mentorship and connection, valuable resources, valuable resource that young people should use. And as we can grow, also enhance and grow upon our activism by being more inclusive and more outward and forward thinking. I hope you don't, I say this in loving spirit, and I want to stress that because in a sense, I'm a guest here, that I would love for future editions of this panel to include some brothers or some sisters from the Pacific Islanders community, because after all, this is part of our celebration of this Heritage Month. And I also love to have to hear voices from our brothers and sisters in South Asian communities as well. But I say all this with love and affection for you guys and girls. And okay, and so within Asian America, we have to be willing to speak up for all Asian American, all Asian people. And so this is from my observation that Asian America portrayal and dialogue has been very East Asian centric, and is dominated by portrayals of wealth and educational excellence. And as young people, you can help to change this outlook and narrative. Okay, calling out instances of Islamophobia is very important. And this is something that Judy mentioned so powerfully, and I thank you, Judy, for sharing this. We ought to question anti-Blackness and colorism within our own community, And I know that happened. It happened within my own family and with some of the Vietnamese people that I have encountered. Okay, so advocating against policies and practices that negatively affect low-income, less educated Asians and Asian Americans. Believe me, we have many people, Asian Americans, for whom life is not so rosy. Okay? I mean, take, as I mentioned, many Vietnamese refugees, for example, Hmong refugees. And so just to give one example, last summer, many Asian people admirably rallied around unfair immigration practices and policies towards international students in the US. But we haven't seen great similar uproar around the fact that Southeast Asian refugees were and are being unjustly detained and deported, or large populations of undocumented Asian Americans that are rendered invisible in our larger Asian American activism. So do remember them, okay? In my family, my mother teaches me one thing, and that is that when asked, whom do you love the most? And my mother always says, ain't it the one who is in trouble, okay? And that is my philosophy in life as well. So our Asian community is very large and diverse. So intersectionality will be the key here, okay?
All right, thank you so much for your response and everyone's responses today. Thank you for taking the time to educate us on your personal experiences. But now I'm gonna open the floor for the audience to ask any questions that they have for the panelists, but because there's just a little bit of time left in the event, I'm only gonna answer or have the panelists answer 1 or 2 questions. So if anyone has any questions, drop them in the chat now, and we can have the panelists respond to it. Give people some time to craft their questions.
So I have a question for Robin. Since that you are a newly grad and you are in the workforce now, could you compare how it is from the college bubble and your work environment?
Yeah, sure. So I think that the biggest difference between being in college and being in the corporate world now, I guess, is that there is a bubble in college where I think like maybe certain world events are less seen because the campus is closed. But also, like I mentioned this before, having platforms like, for example, at Stony Brook, like there are tons of Asian orgs that can amplify these messages about like the hate crimes that have been happening, or even promote awareness about Asian American history. And we don't really get that in the corporate environment. Like there's like one Asian like club in my workplace. They're called like employee resource groups. And for a while they had been really quiet about the Asian hate crimes. And it's interesting because it was all over the news. And so people in like the outside world were hearing about it. But I think in a corporate setting, it's a little different to speak out because people tend to stray away from political statements at work. But I think because this movement has been so like at the forefront of the news now, like my workplace finally was able to host events and town halls to speak about this. And so I think like even if you don't have like a set or formal platform, like even speaking out about it one-on-one to like your trusted coworkers or to a trusted manager, even then that still, it's like speaking up is better than not speaking up. So the format might be different for how information can be spread, but you still can speak up.
Awesome. Thank you, Robin, for that. So I see some people ask some other questions in the chat box, but we're going to go into the breakout rooms now. So I suggest you can ask those questions to the facilitators in the breakout room. So just click the join button and then you all can go into your individual breakout rooms and continue the conversation.
Give me like 2 minutes.
How do the breakout rooms look? Is everything
Just
okay?
double checking right now. I think everything's good. Besides these people still here. I'm just gonna tell them you can start.
Okay, I will join one as well. Hello, everyone. So I believe everyone's back from the breakout rooms. We hope you had a meaningful discussion with the facilitators and your peers. Now we would like to invite Kevin Lee from CAPS, our counseling services at Stony Brook, to present some resources that might be helpful.
Okay, so bear with me for a second here. I'm just going to try to share my screen. Okay. So hi, everyone. My name is Kevin Lee. I'm a licensed social worker, and I am a counselor at CAPS. First, I just want to thank you for inviting me to collaborate with everyone today. Thank you to all the organizers and all our panelists, and sharing all the feedback and your stories and advice and insights. So basically, I'm just going to take some time to talk a little bit more about the mental health resources here at Stony Brook, but also in our community. I'll talk a little bit more about, uh, different resources that can help assist in training. I think as some of our panelists mentioned earlier, about ways to speak up and ways to advocate and ways to intervene, specifically through bystander intervention training. By no means is this meant to be a bystander training, because it would be a disservice to say that it is, given that it's more comprehensive than that. But I will share resources on free trainings that are offered by different organizations via Zoom right now that you can participate in and learn more about ways to stand up for one another. So essentially, what I'll be talking about today is, and again, many of you have already alluded to this, what anti-Asian or Asian American and xenophobic harassment and behaviors look like, introduction to bystander intervention and resources for training, some of the services that we offer here at Stony Brook at CAPS, and then I will also provide a list of different community mental health resources, and I can provide a copy to the organizers, because there will be a bunch of different links. So this was borrowed from an organization called 𝙏𝙚𝙚, and I had the pleasure of attending a training with them pretty recently. And one of the ways that they talked about understanding harassment toward the aAPI community is to think of it as falling along a spectrum, right? So on the left-hand side, you'll see some of maybe, you'll see the different tiers of different kind of harassment or racist behaviors that many in the community can be subjected to. On the left-hand side, you'll see something like staring, distancing oneself away from Asian or Asian American individuals, assuming Asian Americans have the coronavirus or have been exposed to it, microaggressions, assuming Asian Americans are not born here, kind of perpetuating this whole narrative of being a perpetual foreigner. In the middle, you'll see kind of some more higher tier things, shaming, humiliation, often in the form of jokes, except it's not funny and it's not a joke, it's not perceived as a joke. A couple of you mentioned this earlier, using or defending the use of the term Chinese virus, China virus, the Wuhan virus, or Kung flu, not attending or patronizing Asian American owned businesses, calling COVID-19 hotlines to complain about Asian Americans. And then on the right-hand side is what we're seeing more and more of recently, and it's very disheartening to see all of this in the news day in and day out. Verbal harassment, including slurs, telling people to go back to where you came from, or speaking to people in fake Chinese, bullying, online harassment, anti-Asian or Asian American graffiti or memes, spitting, and sexual or physical assault. So, it definitely falls along a spectrum, and this list is not meant to be all inclusive, but just some of the harassment behaviors to look out for. And I did put the link on the bottom, the website for 𝙏𝙚𝙚 for your own review or perusal whenever you have that spare time. Why I mentioned all of that is, even though it falls along a spectrum, there is varying impacts on the individual's mental health. What it can translate to is anxiety, symptoms that are consistent with trauma, symptoms that are consistent with depression, identity concerns, shame, questioning your identity or not embracing your identity. And even if harassment doesn't happen to you personally, knowing that it's happening can lead to feeling on edge, fearful, and unsafe. And it also leads to feelings of being excluded and also other impacts from a community level. So, an example that comes to mind for me right now is different Asian-owned businesses, suffering and not having not having anyone go to their businesses or graffiti on the outside of their restaurants or stores or whatever it might be, just the micro and macro level in terms of psychological and the mental toll that it can have on individuals and the community. So again, this is not meant to be a full bystander intervention training program, but just to give you guys a quick preview, bystander intervention can essentially be understood as people taking care of other people when bad things happen, right? So to give an example of that, if I were kind of walking and on the sidewalk or outside and I trip, I fall down, I injure myself, more often, at least I would hope, people would kind of come to my aid to make sure that I'm okay, to make sure that, to see if I need any medical attention, et cetera, except when it comes to harassment, it's not uncommon for that fight or flight response or freeze response to kick in, and we might freeze and we might not necessarily step in or know what to do. And the whole idea of bystander intervention training is to really break down those obstacles so that we can show up for one another in society. Now, I also want to preface it with this because this was something that was mentioned earlier as well. There are going to be days there are going to be days or certain circumstances where you might feel more empowered to respond. There are going to be days or other circumstances where it might be more of a nuanced situation. So I just want to also emphasize that that's okay. And it's important not to engage in any critical self-talk or self-criticism. Still, the most important thing is prioritizing safety and also prioritizing your health and well-being as well. That's also something that bystander intervention trainings will address as well. How to intervene while doing so, while maintaining safety and making sure that the situation doesn't escalate. So I'm going to reference Hollaback again. I think they're a great resource. I definitely encourage those of you to, at the very least, take a look at their website. They have a bunch of resources, a bunch of different events that are coming up. Even if you can't attend a training, take a look at their page. I would definitely encourage you to do so. But again, if you are able to attend a training, it's free via Zoom, and they address they offer bystander intervention training for all forms of harassment, whether it's workplace harassment, harassment against other marginalized groups. So they're a great resource to definitely look into. And they do so by offering the 5 Ds of bystander intervention: distract, delegate, document, delay, and direct. Just to give you guys a quick preview, distract is essentially distracting the individual who is feeling empowered to direct either verbal insults or harassing another individual. You're distracting them by just stepping in and saying, kind of not deflecting the situation, but just distracting the entire situation. So an example of that is a previous colleague of mine, just to give you an example of what distract means, is one time on campus back in a previous academic institution that I worked at rather, there was a couple arguing and things were escalating. She didn't know what to do. Obviously things were escalating, things could have gotten violent, things were on the verge of becoming violent. And she stepped in, and a way that she distracted or the way she used the distracting strategy in that moment was, hey, do you know where the closest location, or do you know where this academic building is? And they both looked at her like, who are you and why are you asking me this? But it kind of distracted them from the situation that was going on. And she was able to kind of surreptitiously pull away the individual who could have possibly be in some danger based on that kind of, based on the interaction that was going on. Delegate, to give you a quick example of that, is, again, depending on the circumstances, if you're not feeling comfortable, or if you're not feeling safe, or if you have, let's say, children with you and you don't feel comfortable intervening, look around and see if there's anyone who's able to step in and back that person up. You know, whether it's informing, let's say you're at a restaurant, informing the manager that this is what you're planning to do, maybe looking to someone who's close by, who's maybe either more equipped or confident in intervening. Documenting, you know, I think we're seeing a lot of this in the news right now, where, you know, people are recording incidents that occur. The most important thing that I will say about documenting, and Hollaback covers this to a greater detail than I will, is you want to record. If you record it, there's a way to do so, but you also want to leave it up to the person who's being subjected to harassment, and leave it up to them to determine what they want to do. For example, I have a copy of the incident that just took place. Would you like a copy of it? Or if you do forward them the video, you leave it up to them to do what they need to do with it, versus, you know, kind of taking that video and either posting it on social media yourself. You want to give the power back to the victim in this case. Delay is essentially checking in with the person after the fact and making sure that they're okay, seeing if they need anything, need any support, or need any help. And direct, again, is exactly what it sounds. You directly intervene, you step in, and you support the person who, again, is being who's subjected to harassment or racist behavior, or just if you're suspecting that something bad is about to happen, so you directly intervene. So these are the 5 different styles, and Hollaback goes into further detail about ways to really embrace your style of intervention, and this being one of the many approaches to be able to stand up for one another and show up for one another and provide support. I provided the website. Again, it's just simple, www.ihollaback.org. And they have a bunch of trainings that you can sign up for. In terms of what we can provide here at Stony Brook, I'm with Counseling and Psychological Services, specifically CAPS as an acronym. We offer consultation meetings, individual therapy, group therapy. We offer different workshops with a range of different topics. In the event that CAPS is not a good fit for you, we do have case management services that can assist with referring you to someone in the community. We have Let's Talk, which is through the Center for Prevention and Outreach. And so this is good for something where if you're unsure whether you want to engage in therapy or you're ambivalent about it, Let's Talk, you can sign up for a Let's Talk session with a counselor and have that one session to kind of talk to a counselor, see what's going on, and see what approaches to take or what the next steps are that you want to take in terms of really prioritizing your health and well-being. We also have an after-hours emergency service. So right now for the spring semester, we're open from 9 to 5, but during the weekends or before 9 or after 5, if you contact our main number at 631-632-6720, if you have any urgent concerns or any emergencies, if you contact that number, you will be connected with an after-hours counselor to receive further support. Outside of Stony Brook, here are a couple of different organizations as well as their website, and they offer everything, resources, providers in all 50 states, ways to respond, different information, different different events that are going on, different ways to advocate, different ways to stand up for one another. So the first one is the National Asian American Pacific Islander Mental Health Association, and they offer a bunch of different resources for mental health support. Hollaback, I already mentioned. Asian Americans Advancing Justice is very similar to the first one. And I also attached a New York Times article, how to respond to microaggressions. And they cover different things because it's a very nuanced situation, but they definitely cover different ways and different ways to address someone who might be making a comment or indicating something that that is a microaggression, and ways to really disarm that. So again, I know I posted a lot of different resources here with different information. If you did not have a chance to note it, I can provide a copy if or a list of all these different resources if requested. And again, thank you to everyone for having me, and thank you to everyone for really organizing and being a part of this event. Thank you very much.
Thank you for speaking and sharing about the resources. And yes, just to reiterate, anybody from the audience may reach out to Kevin just to get the resources again. We are planning to compile the presentations and send it to the individuals regardless. So Kiara, would you like to continue with your presentation?
Yeah, let me just pull up my presentation and share my screen. All right, so I'm gonna make this, I'm gonna go through this kind of quickly, but just sort of like how to be a good ally for those here who may not be Asian and wanna know how they can support the Stop Asian Hate movement. So, all right, so research. It is not anyone's job to educate you on their own oppression. Rather, do your own research to learn the history of the movement you want to ally with. Learn what has been done before, what has worked, and what still needs to change moving forward. There are a lot of movies and TV series that are good places to start if reading isn't your thing, and there's also like a lot of documentaries that you can sort of go find and educate yourself on. Listen. To best understand how to help, listen to what those in the community are telling you. If there are local speakers on the subject, attend and be attentive. So coming to spaces like this is a great way to listen to other people. If your friends who are a part of a marginalized community decide to engage with you on the subject of discrimination, listen to them and offer support where appropriate. As an ally, that's your job. Just listen, don't speak over anyone. Just listen to their experience because their experience isn't yours. Don't practice performative allyship. So basically, performative allyship is using the struggles of others to make yourself look like a better or more moral person. We've seen a lot of this on social media, so just be more aware of the motivations behind your actions as well as your social media posts in the future. Ask yourself, are you posting this because it's with the intention of being a true ally or because it'll make you look better online? And learn from your mistakes. Being a good ally is an ongoing process and you are bound to say or do the wrong thing at certain points. Sometimes the best way to learn is through trial and error. The important thing is to acknowledge when you're wrong and to not make those same mistakes again. Essentially, welcome failure, but learn from it. So there's a lot of times where, I mess up and I may say something that's not necessarily the right thing to say, but don't let that, get you down. Just keep it up, And lastly, where to give your support. So here are some NYC-based organizations supporting Asian, South Asian, and Pacific Islander communities. You can take a picture or a screenshot. I'll leave this up for a little bit, and that's the end of my presentation. So I'll leave it up for a couple more seconds. And all right.
All right. Thank you for your presentation. So just to conclude everything, I'd like to thank our panelists and our hosts for agreeing to speak tonight. It shows the beauty of collaboration and the willingness of the Stony Brook community to support each other. I hope everybody had the opportunity to voice their experiences and ask meaningful questions. Thank you once again for attending tonight, and I'll pass it on to Steph to close out the event.
So I just want to say once again, thank you so much to everyone for taking time out of their days to attend this event. I hope that everyone feels more educated and better prepared to combat these issues going forth. And I'm going to send a Zoom link into the chat for anyone who wants to continue this conversation on these topics. Stony Brook Medical School their students are hosting a panel with similar topics. So if you guys are interested in learning more or continuing to talk about this, feel free to attend that meeting. And as of now, the event is over. Thank you again for coming. I just ask that the speakers, Kiara, VSA Cabinet, and sisters stay behind. Bye guys, have a good night. Okay, I think that's everyone that's left is either a sister or in VSA.
Let me double check.
Yeah. Am I supposed to be here or my part is done?
You may
We
stay.
just
You may
want
stay.
to, yeah, we just want to take an event photo to commemorate this panel.
Love photos. Can we do a selfie virtually?
We're gonna take a
Where's
screenshot.
Dr. August? I don't see Dr. August here. He left already?
He had to go to another panel that was happening
Events?
at 7. Yes.
Oh yes. He did mention, there might have been a conflict or something like that. Okay, let me.
All right.